Hello, and welcome to the Six Figure Developer Podcast, the podcast where we talk about new and exciting technologies, professional development, clean code, career advancement, and more. I'm John Calloway.
I'm Clayton Hunt.
And I'm John Ash.
With us today is GeePaw Hill. GeePaw is a coach, a professional harvester of the value of change in the software development industry. A geek for 40 years, he spent the last 2 decades helping individuals, teams, and organizations take steps to become closer to who or how they wish to be. Welcome, GeePaw.
Why, thank you. It's nice to be here. Hi, folks.
Yeah, so before we jump into the meat of things, would you give our listeners maybe a little introduction to yourself? You could tell them like how you got started in the industry.
I got started in the industry by... Okay, do you really want me to tell you this?
Yeah, absolutely.
I had a relationship with the boss's girlfriend. And it got me fired. And we moved in together, and I needed a job really, really bad. And I'm a good talker, and I wanted to do some sort of sales, and I started to do computer sales. And I sold, this was 1980, so there were not computer stores everywhere. There were a relatively small number of them, and I got a job selling computers. Personal computers, Ohio Scientifics for the other old people who might be in the audience. And what I found was that I was absolutely fascinated by them. I enjoyed working with them so much and playing with them. I would basically make my calls and do all my work from 9 to noon, and then handle whatever walk-ins came in, which were never really that many, and then spend from noon till 9 just fussing with the computer. And that's how I got into the trade. I ran an interest group for the programming language Forth out of the place, and one of my friends there asked me one time if I thought I could write a Forth for a new processor, and I said yes. I thought I could, and he said, "Can you do it in 6 weeks?" And I gulped and said, "Yeah." And a programmer was born.
Wow.
And I did that. I did that for several years. In fact, I'm a hardcore Forth geek. If anybody out there's got any Forth work anymore, just give me a holler. So that's how I got into the trade.
That's cool. So what are you working on these days, and sort of maybe give us a little bit more of the path to getting there?
Okay, sure. Well, so having been a geek at that point, and a reasonably successful one for 18 years or so, of course, I fell heavily into the design patterns movement back in the middle 90s. And the center of the design patterns movement was the Portland Pattern Repository, which is usually nowadays just called C2.com. And it was the world's first wiki. And I participated very avidly there. And what I eventually did was stumble across the fact that Kent and Ward and Ron were formulating these ideas called extreme programming, and they seemed exactly right to me. And I went to the very first extreme programming immersion class in 1999. By that point, I'd already been using it everywhere and being a coach, even though I was, flying under the radar. We didn't have that word back then. And so about midway through the class, I switched from being a student to being an instructor, because I was already too into it. I already knew too many of the answers to the questions that the other students were asking, even though I certainly didn't know how to be a very good coach at that point. And I became a coach, and that's what I've been doing. Now I'm still very much a practicing geek. I code every day. I love programming, but my main work for the last 20 years has been as a coach. And now for the last 3 or 4 of those years, I sort of split up to doing new content, videos and podcasts and conversations and writing with people all the time. So that's kind of where I'm at this point.
That's cool.
And you're also pretty active on Twitter. I see you pop up in my news feed, in my Twitter feed, quite often, talking about things that are of interest to me, and often in longer tweet threads, which I didn't even know was a thing until I stumbled across one of your early ones, I think.
I could not easily tell you how many times I have failed to write a book. And when I first started doing Twitter, and it's been like 10 years now since I started doing it, I saw someone do this thing where they replied to themselves and created Twitter threads. And I started writing that way. And it is far and away the most productive way I've ever written. And so, every Sunday I write one of those. And sometimes during the week, depends on my mood, I will write another one. I've got one sort of brewing in my head right now. And I think I'm busy all day tomorrow, but maybe on Wednesday I might get that in there. But it's actual improv. You know, I'm writing those, I call them muses. I'm writing those muses live. When they start spilling out into Twitter, it's because I'm typing it one line at a time and hitting the send and going from there. And yeah, it's been really productive for me. Now I caution people, I am not safe for work. And at Twitter, I'm also not, I don't restrict myself in any way to topics of a geekish nature. I talk a lot about music, a certain amount about politics, a certain amount about art, and whatever's on my mind, whatever I'm up to. Yesterday, I was talking about how very much I wanted chicken tikka masala, and how hard it would be to convince my wife to go with me 40 minutes to the nearest Indian restaurant to get carry-out chicken tikka masala, which we actually did, and which I have leftovers here when we're done with our podcast.
I'm right there with you. It's what I had for lunch.
It's the best. Well, you know, it's like Indian cuisine is so rich and complicated and intricate. Sometimes I feel guilty. It's as straightforward as chicken tikka masala, but
sure,
I needed the comfort. Yesterday, I needed the comfort food, so I went for it.
Yeah, my Indian friends are pretty quick to point out that chicken tikka masala is not actually an Indian dish; it's a British one. But but it's what I resort to getting at most Indian restaurants because it's a comfort thing. It's what I know. It's what I like. I know the flavor. I appreciate it. One of the muses that I really attached to and really enjoyed a while ago was on TDD, or test-driven development. Is that a passionate subject for you, or is that just one of many at this point?
You know, it's one of many, but a great deal of the other subjects are things that I learned in the framework of doing test-driven development. So remember, you know, I'm a geek's geek, and I pull a lot of my life lessons out of programming, what I've learned as a programmer, and that holds true there. So yeah, TDD is absolutely a passion of mine, but I'm not, you know, my other topics, many of them are related to the things that I learned in test-driven development.
Yeah, and TDD has been a pretty big passionate subject of ours as well. I think Clayton and I wrote a book on TDD and have gone to many a company and brought TDD to organizations and espoused the benefits there. But I've also seen in the wild blog posts with maybe clickbait type titles where TDD is dead and
Sure.
testing is dead and the like. Why TDD? Why now? What is that still a practice that matters? Is it beneficial to developers these days?
So only if they're actually regular humans.
Oh.
But I mean, if they're not, if they're geniuses, if they're brilliant beyond the limits of human tolerance, then probably they don't need TDD. Probably they don't need any textbooks or any approaches that are structured in any way. He said about TDD is dead. Boy, that article drove a lot of people crazy, including me.
Yeah.
But anyway, why TDD? When I started in 1980, you know, and if you go back and read software development theory in the 80s and 90s, what you're going to see is that software development is a sort of a three-step process. You have nothing, and then you have everything, and then you move on. And not only is that, you know, what those books thought of software at that time. But of course, these ideas are still all very much being taught in our schools. So people come into the trade and they think that that's how it is. And yet, you know, in the 80s, that was actually reasonably true. You went from project to project. The projects could be completely different. You didn't have anything, you didn't talk to anybody, and then all of a sudden you had everything and you shipped it. And then you were done with that project and you moved on to another project. But two things happened, one after the other, to change all that. The first one was the rather obvious, extraordinary decrease in the cost of physical computing. You know, I bought my first computer for, I don't know, $1,800, and it had less computing power than your Fitbit. And actually not just less by a great deal than your Fitbit. And it was like that, but the prices, of course, plummeted. And that was sort of phase one. Physical computing got so cheap. Everybody and her dog could have a computer. And in fact, their computer, speaking of dogs, I don't know how I invoked her magically. That was really cool. In fact, I mean, looking around this room, I know I'm a computer geek, but I bet most of our audience, even if they're not in their office, looking around the room, there's probably 15 computers in view of them right now that they don't even think about most of the time. Then phase two is this whole business of the cost of distribution plummeted. So what happens then in those cases is markets open dramatically. When I can lower the physical costs and I can lower the distribution costs, all of a sudden, I'm not writing the archetypal 4-week application that rents VHS tapes over the counter to a single video store owner. I'm Netflix, right? Oh, and that's what happens when you lower that thing. And all of a sudden, these projects that you could do in a month or 6 weeks, they disappear. Yes, there are still places in the trade where that occasionally happens, but far less commonly than when I was a young geek. At this point, what happens is the whole concept of a finish line disappears. The applications take so long to get going that there are many finish lines on their way to the finish line. And then, because we've invested so much time and energy, and because, oh, look, right over there, there are another 5 suckers we could get to rent videotapes from us. We expand our feature set to open up a new tranche of customers. Again and again and again. So what does this all add up to? A state of continuous change. Non-stop change. From the only greenfield software development that happens on the first day. Bam, there's your greenfield. Now it's dirty.
Yep.
Now you're doing brownfield work and you're changing code every day. And that's what the overwhelming majority of software developers do. And so my thing is, why do I do TDD? Because it enables me to change things as rapidly as possible. And, you know, people will talk about, we all know certain parties believe that if you don't do test-driven development, you're immoral. And other parties believe that test-driven development is a matter of art and beauty and pride and blah, blah, blah. I have to say, you know, I'm in this for the money. And I do test-driven development for the value, because I can ship more value faster. And it isn't that, I don't care whether you want more features. I don't care whether you want fewer bugs. I don't care whether you want faster performance. I don't care whether you want more beautiful screens. In order to achieve any one of those values, you got to change code, don't ya? Mm-hmm. So any technique we have that changes code more effectively is a winning technique. Sorry, you asked me, am I passionate about this? Well, you see what happens. I hope you've learned a valuable lesson, John.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thought. I hadn't put it I hadn't thought about it quite like that. There isn't a finish line anymore. There isn't calling software done. My mother was fond of telling me that as a schoolgirl, she used to volunteer and work in the school office, and they would take attendance, and the punch cards would come in, and you would stick a screwdriver or a pencil through the punch cards and sort them that way. And then, computers were mainframes, and then computers were soldered circuits that you would deliver, and then they became diskettes and CD-ROMs that would be burned and written to and mailed out. Yep. And now things are delivered via the internet or via a network or via the cloud, and enhancements happen daily at this point.
Absolutely. So if I have software I can't change, I'm out of the market.
Yep.
That's why not just TDD, but TDD and refactoring and continuous integration and all those other aspects, what I call the modern software development synthesis, the modern synthesis of software development. That's why all that stuff is in there, because it's about supporting our ability to change code as rapidly as possible.
What? We're passing notes.
Yeah. Well, so do you think that a lot of dev shops have maybe lost the plot on what they're developing for and why some of these practices matter?
I think they have lost the plot in myriad ways. In myriad ways, right? I want to be forgiving because the demand is so extraordinary. It's easy to see how they made the decisions that they made, but their premises are broken, so fundamentally broken. They don't actually understand what they do. They think I'm a typist who has like a special keyboard with extra symbols on it, and they try to control and drive and manage the work that way. And of course, that doesn't work because I'm not a typist. At one point I thought I coined this expression, but I didn't. It was Kevlin Henney. He'd been saying it like 5 years before I ever said it the first time. But the expression is this: typing is not the bottleneck. Mm-hmm. Software development is thinking. It's creating. It's making stuff up. A lot of shops have completely forgotten that. They think they'll go faster if they can find ways for us to either type faster or type less. They need to find ways to help us change things and think more. If we can do those, we're good.
One thing I find interesting, because I agree entirely with that being the thing that people sort of get off on, or are wrong on. But what's funny is I've never encountered anyone actually giving typing tests when they're interviewing developers, which is funny because like that's effectively the way they treat it though. Like once you get the job, like, oh, you're just here to type out the code, and that's sort of the way. But it's like we never offer a typing test,
right?
Which is the right thing to do, right? I'm not advocating for us to start offering typing tests for developers, but it's just funny. They're even inconsistent in their own logic. What in your ways? So as a coach, like, how do you bring people around? Like when you encounter, those folks, or are they hopeless?
I'm a really odd coach. Well, okay. Maybe that's not exactly what I mean. Maybe it is, though. A lot of coaches feel that their job is to come in and install their idea of good into another organization. And I don't. I used to believe that. And what I found was that when I came from that point of view, I lost more than I won. I didn't get what I wanted, and I didn't get what they wanted either. And none of us got what we wanted, and all of us were unhappy, and it didn't work.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Lose.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh, I've invented a new system. It's called lose. So I don't see it that way. What I do is I go into shops and I ask them what they don't like. And I ask them who they wish they were, mostly as individuals, not as teams. And I don't always ask it in that simple a way, right? There's sensitivity there. There's coaching. Large part of coaching is listening to things that aren't being said. But what I try to do is create or exploit openings through which individuals, including sometimes me, can step a little bit closer to either who or how people feel differently about the terminology, who or how they wish to be. So what does that amount to? I stand around with a lot of cool, clean water. And when people are working and they turn around and wipe their foreheads and look kind of thirsty, I say, hey, you want a drink? And they grab it from me and they drink it. And they're like, oh, cool, thanks. That's all. I do that a lot until they start to say, where are you getting this water? You seem to have a lot of cool, clean water. I kind of like it. And then I'm like, oh, well, I got this pool over here and that pool over there and those pools over there, and that's where I'm getting it. And I do an enormous amount of that. I mean, the reality is that a large part of Agile coaching is actually just letting people find out for themselves what it is they need to learn, you know, and then giving them the chance to learn that. I feel bad, you know, I've been through years where, so I'm sure you guys know the figures, right? Half of all software developers have less than 5 years of experience, right? And that's staggering. That is staggering to me. And I had to wrestle with that for a long time. First, because of course it aggravated me so much. Then, because once I decided I was going to do something about it, it was like, well, what can you do about that? It's 200 to 1. It's 200 to 1 out there. How can I help 200 people with the stuff that they need? And then I gradually realized that they didn't get in, most of them didn't get into this business to become fabulously wealthy, famous, sexy celebrity computer geeks. They got into this business because they liked this stuff. And most of the people who did get into this for money quit after a year. Because you know what? It's a taste. You got to have a taste for working with high structure, high detail, imperative text. You really got to have a taste for it. So once I began to see them not as inferior in their training, not as people I had to tell things to, but as people I could hand water to whenever they needed, whatever kind of water they needed, everything changed for me. And so now, you know, when I have my standard, this is who I am as a coach packet that I send to people who ask the questions. And it says, you know, I'm about better. I'm not about a system. I don't come to your house and install the new Agile wiring system. I am about helping people become who they wish they were. And somewhat to my surprise, some people bite. You know, you might think to yourself, well, corporations will never go for that. But, you know, some of them do. Some are like, really? That's really weird. Why don't you come here and try that for a little bit and we'll see how it goes.
So what is day 2 of an engagement look like? You've been there for day 1 and you've provided refreshing drinks, and they've started to catch on that they too would like to be refreshed from time to time, and they're starting to buy in on. So
of course, you know, I mean, we're speaking day 2 in terms of the 7 days of creation. Obviously, that doesn't happen on the second day. On the second day, I still don't know which way the bathroom is. Right. But day 2, I think increasingly for me, day 2 involves getting us into some sort of mobbing arrangement. And I don't mean like mobbing as a big formal practice and rules and da-da-da-da-da. I just mean, are we working together? Are we hanging out? I mean, now in this virtual age, are we hanging out while we work? Because if we're not hanging out while we work, we're not gonna be able to make the next jump, which is the jump away from mechanics and into community. And so I do that. That's often a very delicate business. I'm a coach. I'm perfectly prepared to engineer wins, and sometimes in mobs I have to do that. Right? Sometimes when I work with teams, especially that, because it's so scary, right? So many of us, we weren't trained how to do this. There's bozos walking around telling you that it doesn't take any training or practice, when in fact it's very difficult to learn how to do that. And so, I'm very gentle. I'm very gentle. It helps that I am always an external coach. I don't work for companies, and I am never in the chain of command. Having those two things helps me enormously. I don't know how folks who do, inside coaching, I don't know how they work, or if they work. I mean, I'm not trying to be mean in particular to internal coaches, right? We all know there are a lot of people who call themselves coaches who are basically bosses by any other name.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it just takes a good stock of whiskey at home.
Yeah, right? Oh, man. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I even wrote a muse about the old coach at the end of the bar, the old guy who comes in and sits down at the end of the bar when all the young coaches are sitting around talking about how stupid their people are and da-da-da-da-da. I wrote a muse about it because I was like, yeah, no, they're not, actually. They're pretty smart. Most of them are pretty smart. They're just not solving the problem you want them to solve. They're working on another problem. They're working on the problem of, how do I feed my family? How do I get this little box on Jira checked off? How do I do this and that and the other, right? They're just not working on your problem.
And you're making them use Jira, which is in and of itself is just terrible.
Oh my God. What are we going to do about this? People, what are we going to do about this? It is.
Yeah, I find the worst is when the company believes that when you're solving those problems and that's the company believes you're doing the right thing, like they don't even recognize that you're not solving the right problem, and they're like pleased with it, and I feel completely hopeless in those situations, because like how can I communicate to you, the company, that you don't even know what up from down is, because you have me doing running on a treadmill and saying, hey, we're getting somewhere.
Right. Yeah, boy, it's really something. And of course, it's not true that, there's nothing inherent about Jira.
Sure.
You have to be clever to outwit its one task, one human thing. But you could be clever enough to do that. And you know what I mean? Honestly, it's just a database in a web. Okay, there's nothing to it. But what is wrong with it, of course, is that these folks are adopting it in the belief that in fact, one person, one task is correct, that estimates are commitments, that that essentially what they're thinking of themselves as a mastermind at the control panel. And I yell at you, you yell at her, she yells at him, he yells at the team, and the team will do exactly what we want. And we will prove it by monitoring it all and mediating it all through a middle 90s software web interface.
Yeah, I mean, you just apply pressure until the job's done, right? That's how.
Yeah.
That's how you actually.
After all, it's just typing, anyways. So.
Yeah, right. So true. It's all just typing, really. Mavis Beacon, where are you when we need you?
So where do you at the end or towards the end of an engagement, and the teams are humming along. They're speaking the same language. They're all on the same page together. What do you leave a team with knowledge wise? Do you leave them with additional homework? Do you leave them with standard operating procedures, their team norms? What does it look like to take a newly formed or newly reformed team and ensure that they'll continue on their path to success?
So if I win, right? If I have done a great job, I don't have to tell them anything except, send them Valentine's Day cards that say, keep changing things. Don't forget to change things. Because what will have happened, right? If I've got it, they will have formed community as opposed to machine. And I might come back and mediate, because communities sometimes need some mediation. They need some help sometimes with outsider voices, giving them a third way between two sides. So I might do that from time to time. But if I've really done my job, I get people who are happy to be doing what they're doing and successful, and essentially, even though I might not even ever use this word for them, living, might not even ever use this word for them, living in community, and they just don't know it because nobody told them that that's what community looks like. They just think they have a really great job.
Mm-hmm.
So are there hallmarks to what you consider a healthy community that we could work towards or notice once we're there?
Yeah, boy, I'm not sure I can rattle them off. Open disagreement, right? Disagreement that doesn't creep around corners but just comes out. That's a big one. A more rich understanding of consensus than the sort of naive view that consensus means unanimity.
Yeah.
Consensus is a little thicker than unanimity. In particular, it involves standing aside. Sometimes I actually live in a hippie community where we make our decisions by consensus, but sometimes you look around the room and everybody in the room thinks we should do A, and you think they're wrong. But you know what? A is not going to kill us. It's not life-threatening. So let's try A. Maybe I should stand aside and let them do what they want to do. Maybe they'll learn something, or maybe I'll learn something. So a more rich sense of consensus, direct conversation everywhere, right? The more humans are speaking to each other, not in a meeting, the better. And that's kind of, the magic sauce. So that's three things. That's kind of maybe the best I can do.
Okay.
I don't see any particular procedures or systems required for community.
Okay. So we've talked about TDD. You've mentioned the extreme programming disciplines and community and other stuff. Many people, especially of our listeners, they're in a situation where they're maybe trying to pursue this stuff on their own, or they're trying to bring it back to their teams. Are there any resources that you could point people to that would help them sort of either kind of develop that personally or be able to bring these things to their teams?
So without listing specific resources, there's a lot out there, but rather I see individuals, especially individuals in large organizations, need what I call 4 mentors. They need a pole star mentor, somebody who's, somebody you think is a big deal, not in your company, who is really like the expert in your thing, right? Somebody passionate, somebody noisy, a pole star that you can orient yourself towards and say, North must be that way. Then if you're in a large company, you need a rabbi. Rabbi is a word that comes from of all things, law enforcement. In large city police departments, you need somebody 2 or 3 levels above you who actually wants you to succeed. Not a project, not a task, not a political argument, but you. And so they will help you engineer permissions and enthusiasm and support from within your organization to let you go study and learn and experiment with these things. The experimenting is really critical, of course. So what's that? That's the Polestar. That's the mentor. You might need a teacher. There are plenty of good teachers out there on the internet. They teach in a variety of different styles. You want to find the ones that fit you. If you work with a teacher, a teacher's material and it doesn't work, then that's cool. Doesn't mean they suck. Doesn't mean you suck. It means the chemistry wasn't right. The people who I think are some of the best teachers are folks like Ron Jeffries, who's also a Polestar, which is pretty impressive. Joe Rainsberger, also a Polestar. Ted Young, very, very good teacher. All of these people have continuous live output about how they do TDD, which is pretty cool stuff. And then finally, you need a buddy mentor, right? You need a swimming buddy. Mm-hmm. We don't usually think of our swim buddy as a mentor, but in fact they are, right? A swimming buddy provides us with the ability to find out whether what just happened was really hard and bad, or whether I just am not looking at it in the right way. If we both say, yeah, that sucked, then you know what? It probably sucked and wasn't the right thing to do. But with a learning partner, and we don't even have to be learning together at the same place, but we have to be learning approximately the same stuff at approximately the same time. Mm-hmm. And if we had that, then we're actually good to go. So that's what I would say. I would say what you got to do is line up your 4 mentors: Polestar, Rabbi, Teacher, and Buddy. For buddies, you can often go to, there's only about 25 bazillion meetups at which you could find a potential buddy simply by, during the introductions, saying, I'm looking for somebody who wants to do, TDD on car software in C, in Forth. You go to 10 of those meetings, I guarantee you're going to get 3 people say, oh yeah, that's what I want to do too. Boom, you got yourself a swimming buddy. Finding teachers is easy because they're out there on the internet. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Rabbis is hard because it all depends on your organization. And Polestars are easy because, they make a lot of noise. They're easy. They're opinionated.
So that kind of rolls into the next thing. What has been helpful in your career that you might share with those just getting started, or those maybe looking to level up their own careers?
So, y'all pinged me to say, was I up for doing the podcast? And the answer is yes, of course I was. And I have a meetup next Tuesday, and I had a meetup last Friday, and I had a conference 3 weeks ago, and so on and so forth. And the reason I do that is because I believe in interest groups. I believe in them. I got my start as a professional programmer because I ran an interest group about Forth, the programming language. And I know I'm not the only one, especially the OG, right? We believe in that movement. Go join meetups. Hang out with people. You don't have to love every minute of every meetup, but listen to the people that you like in the crowd, in addition to the person who's on stage, if it's one of those kind of meetups. And then reach out to them on the side. Geekery can be a really lonely business. And what that means is that actually you're not alone. There's lots of people out there who want to learn at the same rate and the same intense stuff that you want to. And so I would urge everybody to get out there and go to meetups. And when meetups get physical again, go to those too. Although I hope virtual meetups don't go away. Because actually, I think the virtual meetups have been some of the best stuff. They're certainly a lot better than virtual conferences, frankly. I think they're more effective. They're cooler. It's easier when there's 15 of us, right? Because we can all talk.
Yeah. Definitely more engagement at the virtual meetups than there is at the conferences.
Yep.
So, where can our listeners go to follow you and keep up with what you're working on?
Oh, well, you can't miss me on. Go to Twitter. It's
Okay.
GeePaw Hill, GeePawhill, and you'll get the whole package. Or if you just really only are up for conversations about technique, conversations about software development in the larger sense, conversations about the philosophy of design, then you can go to the site, which is the same thing, GeePawHill.org. And I have all of the stuff that I do on Twitter that is actually germane, these long threads that I write, turns into a blog, and you can get the full text, drop spam free into your mailbox. You can also get audio. You can get the audio version of podcasts dropped into your Anchor or whatever based podcast system that you use. So that's how you get a hold of me. And of course, I am GeePaw at GeePawHill.org. You can drop me a line.
All right, GeePaw, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. This has been great.
Cool. I had a nice time. Thanks for letting me blah 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 so much.
All right, chat, hang out for just a minute. We'll wrap up the recording of the podcast here, and then we'll keep chatting for just a few more minutes and be respectful of GeePaw's time. So if you've got specific questions, just go ahead and drop those in chat, and we'll wrap up from here. That was GeePaw Hill. GeePaw is a coach, a professional harvester of the value of change in the software development industry. A geek for 40 years, he spent the last 2 decades helping individuals, teams, and organizations take steps to become closer to who or how they wish to be.
If you like this episode, please like, rate, and review on iTunes.
Find show notes, blog posts, and more at sixfiguredev.com.
Catch us live each week on Twitch, and be sure to follow us on Twitter at sixfiguredev.
This has been another episode of the Six Figure Developer Podcast, helping others reach their potential. I am John Calloway.
I'm Clayton Hunt.
And I'm John Ash.
And the podcast is now downloading. So I have a question since you mentioned Forth. I've always heard that you could write a Forth compiler in something like 23 lines of Forth. Do you know if that's actually true?
That is actually true.
That is awesome. I want to learn Forth for that reason, just because.
There are only even in a full-scale implementation of Forth with everything in it, there are really only 6 methods that have to be written native, and they are all ridiculously simple. Like on an old style CPU, greater R and R greater amount to pulling or pushing something off the stack, which is, one line of assembly language.
Mm-hmm.
So you can bring up a Forth with a bunch of ASCII and those 6 things implemented. And that's what I did actually for a living. I learned how to do that. The hardest part of bringing up Forth on a new CPU, we get a new CPU every month in those days. The hardest part of bringing it up was figuring out how the damn RS-232 cable had to be custom wired to move the ASCII across over to the new computer.
RS-232.
Yeah, baby. I found about 5 years ago, I opened up some random box around here, and I had a damn breakout box still in there. I haven't used it certainly since 2000 at the. But anyway, we have folks still in the chat. I'm going to take a very quick bad break.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'll be right back, please.
Okay. Yep.
If anybody is there, fire up some questions for them.
Sure. Yeah, chat, go ahead and drop questions in chat, and we'll be sure to address them. One thing we didn't cover, and I can't believe we didn't cover, was where the name GeePaw came from. So we'll be sure to ask that. And Clayton, you suspected that he was given that name at birth, right?
Yeah, it's got to be his birth name.
Yep.
It's our little GeePaw, 5-year-old going to school.
I was also going to make the joke that he mentioned, people quitting after 1 year if they were in it for the money, or if they've been on Clayton's team. So,
Oh,
Clayton
see now though. So he has learned the same lesson that I have learned. He said it differently, but you can't even if you know you're right. You can't just roll into a job and be like, "Hey, do it my way, because I'm right." You kind of, let them. Children are the future. I don't know how the song goes. Let them lead the way.
I believe the children are our future.
exactly.
Teach them well. Let them lead the
That's
way.
the word. Teach them well. I can never remember teach them well.
We've come to the sing-along portion of the show. Yeah, so that was one of the questions that we didn't ask during the episode was, GeePaw, is that your given name? Your parents named you that at birth?
Yes. Okay, so my given name is Michael, but I know I'm obviously a grandfather at this point, but I became a grandfather at a ridiculously young age. I was just 31 years old.
Oh, wow.
My wife's a little older than me. She started young, and her kids started young. And shortly after she and I got together, I was presented with my first grandchild.
Wow.
And, my friends and family thought that was the funniest thing they had ever heard. So they took every conceivable opportunity. Grandfather this, grandfather that. Then it became grandpa, then it became GeePaw. And so GeePaw is just, slang for grandfather.
Yeah.
And that's what they call me. And that's been, 30 years now they've been calling me GeePaw.
Nice.
So, the thing about it is when I went out on the internet and said, I'm going to hang out my shingle as a, an extremely small fish in a small pond with agile software development. I said to myself, what am I going to call myself? Because you know how many Michael Hills there are in the universe?
Yeah.
There's a lot.
And we already had Uncle Bob, so now you're just...
Yeah, no, I'm not going there. And so I said, well, what about GeePaw? After all, it's the best job I've ever had.
Yeah.
So, let's go with that. And that was like, actually, wow. That would have been about 2002. Although it was many years before I got to the place where most people in the business actually call me GeePaw. Not everybody, and it's fine to not call me that, but most people call me GeePaw.
I was really hoping that your parents gave you that name. I think that would have been the best.
That would be really cool. But you know what? My middle name is Dennis. My father wanted to name me Denzel.
Nice.
How cool would that be? If I were Denzel Hill today, that would be so incredibly cool. Of course, this was Kansas in 1960.
Yeah.
Wow.
And even though my father's best friend in the world was a black man named Denzel, my mother was not going to let that happen. So I wound up being Dennis. Although, sometimes I think to myself, I could just go do a deed poll and change my name.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'll stick with GeePaw for now.
Yeah. I'm a junior. My mother's name is Sarah. My sister's first name is Sarah. So my parents didn't really have a whole lot of originality. So whatever. But yeah, my son has seen the gray become more prominent in my hair and beard, and now he has started referring to me. Well, you're a grandfather, right? Like, you're 8 and my only child. No. Like, well, gray hair means grandfather. Like, okay, sure. Yeah, one of the questions that was coming to mind while you're describing your day 2 or maybe even day 1 about community and interaction there. What have you come into a situation where, or maybe just a difficult situation where a team struggles to become cohesive, or struggles to figure out what their common ground is, and share their single path forward?
Right. Absolutely, I have. That's difficult, and it decreases the odds for sure of me being able to help. But mostly what I try to do in that situation is, if open animosity hasn't broken out just yet, it's usually still just people working at cross purposes.
Okay.
And remember I talked about create or exploit openings through which people can become more who they wish they were. Well, the thing is, there isn't one better GeePaw lurking inside me, right? There's 50 of them. I could be a better teacher. I could be a better grandpa. I could be a better typist. I could be a better coder. I could be a whole bunch of different betters, and every one of them would please me. So then I see that what my problem is how to take two people's range of betters and get one or two of those to overlap. Because if I can do that, we're not at cross purposes anymore. Well, we don't want the same thing, or we don't want the same thing for the same reason, but we do want the same actual interaction. And if we can get to that, then, I call it weaving betters. And it's weaving different people's betters into something that actually forms some sort of coherent whole. But I mean, don't let me kid you. That's hard. And the fact that describes what happens when it works. But obviously it's not very easy to get it to work.
Yeah. What if open animosity has already set in?
Asking for a friend.
I mean, hypothetically.
I suppose it depends on how deeply entrenched it is. A lot of times, people. I mean, I'm sure you've had this in your life, right? You're mad at somebody for something they didn't actually do, and other times you're mad at people for something they did, but they didn't actually intend, and so on and so forth. There always might be ways if it isn't too entrenched. If it is too entrenched, I don't take the good. There are 25 million developers on this planet, and I would say to every developer who's listening to us right now, just please remember Martin Fowler's advice. Change your organization or change your organization.
Yeah.
And every coach knows this. I mean, every one of us, right? We've all been in the situation. I have walked away from organizations, and the only good I did was open up the developers to the possibility of leaving. And I know that's a horrible thing to say, but not if you've seen those organizations.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But just in the US, there's a 35,000 person shortfall of software developers every year. And there has been for the last 30. There's work. There is. I swear to you, there's work. And you can get it. And, if you're in a situation where it's unbearable, don't bear it.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. And you brought up the being mad at people for something they didn't do, or something that they did do and didn't intend to do, or something to that effect. I've woken up, and I know my wife has woken up after having had a dream where one of us wronged the other one. And she be mad at me, or I'm mad at her for something that the fictional us did to the other in our personal dreams. Like, I can't possibly.
Just last week, Virginia came in to greet me. We don't get up necessarily at the same time, blah, blah, blah. She came in to greet me. I was sitting down at the computer just getting started. She said, "Hi." I'm like, "I'm not talking to you." Like what? Like, you, and then I told her what she'd done in her dream. And she's like, I didn't do that. Yeah, boy, it's really real when it's real like that, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
One,
Well, GeePaw, go ahead.
oh, yeah. Now, if I can sneak in one little question here. So you a lot of what you've done seems to be being very transparent about what your thought process is and your methodologies, and but you so right now you're basically coaching people how to sort of become better versions of themselves. How do you coach, and have you considered it, people becoming who you are, like the job that you do? Because it takes a lot of insight and ability to read people and listen. Like you said, sometimes the biggest thing being said is the things that are not being said, right? And so it takes a lot of wisdom and experience to be able to suss out those teams and where people are. How do you kind of teach that to people?
So here's the thing. What I want to do with my life is do that. Is to teach and mentor all of this to all different folks. The problem is that I want so bad for them to get what they need that I don't make any money. And so I have to choose what markets to ask to pay for me. And, I'm not like, I live in the country. I live in a hippie community. I own my house. I own my car. I'm not moving. I don't actually have all that high monthly expenses, but they are there. All of the content that you've seen me give, all of it, 100% of it, the videos I made, the blog, the muses, the podcast is 100% free. All of this was prelude. I would love to teach that. I would love to work with junior coaches. I even have a small group of folks that I'm putting together right now and mentoring them. And at least one of them's mission is to become a coach. That's more free work, of course. But I think that ultimately I'm not going to be able to do any of this work if I can't figure out a way to make my relatively modest monthly nut by working on that stuff. And to be honest, that is a problem I have not solved yet. Now, if if anybody out there in the world, anywhere hearing this says, well, geez, we can do that. And their scheme does not involve selling people's information to large organizations or putting tracking cookies on my website or all the other evil marketing crap that's out there, give me a holler, But I don't know how to solve that problem. It takes a long time to help somebody with that kind of stuff. That's very thick stuff because, partly it's a long list of technique, of course. But then partly it's just like great big lessons. Like it's a great big ass lesson to learn that, sometimes you need to shut up.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes you need to keep that to yourself. You don't have to, I'm often saying this on the web and people are always kind of taken aback by it. Being honest means believing everything you say. Doesn't mean saying everything you believe.
Yep.
Those are great big lessons. That's not, technique.
Yeah.
You just take off one Fortune 500 company. You'll learn that lesson. It's fine.
Right.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. I know it was a hard one, but I appreciate it.
Well, GeePaw, this has been great. Really do appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Absolutely.
We're looking at about 3 weeks out from releasing of the podcast, so we'll get the audio all cleaned up and packaged up and look to release that in 3 weeks. So chat, be on the lookout in your podcast players for that. We will be back on Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern for the live coding live stream here on Twitch. Next Monday for the live broadcast of the podcast at 6 p.m. Next Tuesday at 7 p.m. for hosting of stpete.net meetup. And next Wednesday again for live coding. So with that, we will say again, thank you, GeePaw. Thank you, Denzel. We will raid our friend over on Clancy's channel doing some work with .NET Maui and say good night, everybody.
Cool.
Good night.
Thanks, guys. That was very nice. I had a great time.
Yeah.